I want you to think about the worst moment of your life. Not a bad day, not a frustrating week. The actual worst moment, the one that made you feel like the floor had disappeared beneath your feet. The one that made you question everything you thought you knew about God, about life, about yourself. Maybe you're in it right now. Maybe you're still carrying it. Maybe it happened years ago and you still haven't fully recovered. In that moment, or in moments like it, human beings have reached for the same 6 verses for over 3,000 years. Not because they are magic words, not because reciting them makes the pain stop, but because somehow, these 6 verses know something about suffering that very few other words in history have ever captured. There is a story, and I want you to hear this before we read a single word of the psalm. During World War II, there were soldiers in the trenches who had nothing. No food, no warmth, no certainty they would survive the night. Chaplains would walk the lines and find men in the mud, lips moving silently. And when they leaned in to listen, they kept hearing the same words. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." A psalm written by a shepherd king 3,000 years ago, spoken by young men in the mud of war, still carrying weight today in hospital waiting rooms, in prison cells, in the darkest 3 in the morning, moments when no one else is awake and you are desperate for something to hold on to. Today, we are going to walk through Psalm 23, slowly, carefully, deeply, line by line. We are going to look at the original Hebrew. We are going to understand the culture. We are going to let the ancient world illuminate what these words actually meant when David first wrote them. And I promise you, by the end of this psalm will never sound the same again. Before we read a single word, we need to understand the man who wrote it. Because Psalm 23 is not a poem written from comfort, it is a poem written from survival. David was the youngest of 8 sons. In a culture where birth order determined everything, he was last. When the prophet Samuel came to Jesse's house looking for the next king of Israel, his father didn't even think to call David in from the fields. He wasn't worth considering. He was the one nobody noticed. But David had spent years alone on hillsides with sheep, and those years were not wasted years. They were forming years. As a shepherd, David learned to track weather patterns. Survival depended on it, no. He learned which valleys had fresh grass after the rain and which were dangerously dry. He learned which paths were safe and which had predators waiting in the shadows. He also learned, alone out there under the stars, how to talk to God. The Bible tells us that David killed both a lion and a bear with his bare hands to protect his flock, not with an army, not with weapons, by himself. He knew what it meant to stand between something he loved and something that wanted to destroy it. So when David later wrote about God as a shepherd, he wasn't using a pretty metaphor. He was describing something he had lived. And his life after those shepherd years was not easier. It was harder. He was anointed king as a teenager, and then immediately went back to the fields. Nothing changed for years. Meanwhile, King Saul, the man he was meant to replace, became obsessed with destroying him. David spent years as a fugitive, hiding in caves, running through wilderness, surrounded by men who were loyal to him but also desperate and dangerous. He was betrayed by people he trusted. He lost his closest friend, Jonathan, to battle. He lost a child. He made catastrophic moral failures that haunted him for the rest of his life. He fought wars. He survived assassination attempts. He experienced the kind of public shame that breaks most people permanently. and yet. He sat down at some point in his life and wrote 6 verses that began with the most personal, most intimate, most audacious claim a human being can make about God. Not the Lord is powerful, not the Lord is holy, not the Lord is a great king. The Lord is my shepherd, my personal, intimate, present. The word David uses for the Lord here is YHWH, the personal name of God, not Elohim, the general word for God, not Adonai, the title of authority. YHWH, the covenant name. The name God gave Moses at the burning bush. I am who I am. The eternal, self-existing, always present one. That is the one David calls his shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In the ancient Near East, the shepherd metaphor for a king or a god was not uncommon. Rulers often called themselves shepherds of their people, but there was always a distance to it, the great shepherd overseeing the vast flock from above. David flips it completely. He doesn't say God is the shepherd of Israel, the shepherd of the nations, the shepherd of the world. He says, my shepherd. One sheep, one shepherd, close enough to touch. To understand how radical this is, think about the sheep themselves. Sheep are not impressive animals. They are not fast. They are not strong. They have almost no natural defenses. They cannot find water on their own in dry climates. They will walk off cliffs if not redirected. They will graze the same patch of ground until it's dead, while fresh pasture is just over the hill. They are entirely, completely dependent on the shepherd. Without him, they do not survive. And David, the warrior king, the giant slayer, the man after God's own heart, looks at his own life and says, that is me. That is exactly what I am in relation to God. Completely dependent, completely reliant, not ashamed of it. In fact, at peace with it. Now, I shall not want. This phrase has been misread and misused for centuries. People quote it as if it means, I will get everything I ask for. As if having God as your shepherd means your bank account is always full and your health is always perfect, and nothing ever goes wrong. But that is not what David is saying. The Hebrew word here is chaser, which means to lack, to be without, to be deficient. I shall not lack what I truly need. David is not saying his life will be easy. The rest of the Psalms make it abundantly clear that David's life was not easy. He wrote Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The same words Jesus would cry from the cross. He knew abandonment. He knew darkness. He knew lack. What he is saying in Psalm 23 is this: looking back across everything, across all the valleys, all the betrayals, all the losses, I never lacked what I truly needed to survive. I never lacked what I needed to keep going. The shepherd always provided, not always what I wanted, not always when I wanted it, but always what I needed. There are seasons in life when God is not giving you what you want. The prayer isn't being answered the way you asked. The door isn't opening. The healing isn't coming. The relationship isn't being restored. And in those moments, I shall not want can feel like a cruel joke. But David is inviting you to a longer view, a view from the end of a life rather than the middle of a crisis. A view that says, if I look back from the other side of this, I will see that the shepherd knew what I needed, even when I couldn't see it myself. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. These verses sound like a lovely nature scene. Green fields, calm water, peaceful rest. But when you understand what's actually being described, it becomes something far more powerful. Let's start with the green pastures. In ancient Israel, finding green pasture was genuinely hard work. Most of the land is dry, rocky, semi-arid. The shepherd had to know exactly where the good grazing land was, and it changed with the seasons. He had to lead his flock sometimes for miles to find grass that was actually nutritious. Green pasture wasn't just beauty. It was provision. It was life. But here's the thing about sheep lying down in pasture. A sheep will only lie down when 4 conditions are met. A sheep will only lie down when it is free from fear, when it is free from friction with other sheep, when it is free from flies and pests, and when it is free from hunger. All 4 conditions have to be present simultaneously before a sheep can rest. Which means, when David says, "He makes me lie down in green pastures," he is saying that God takes care of every threat, every fear, every source of friction, every pest, every hunger, all at once. Not that those things don't exist, but that the shepherd is attentive enough to every single one of them that the sheep can finally stop being on guard. And notice the word makes. He makes me lie down. Not invites, not suggests. Makes. Sometimes rest is not something we choose. Sometimes God brings us to it by removing the ability to keep running. A forced season of stillness, an injury that slows you down, a door that won't open no matter how hard you push, a season where nothing is moving and you feel stuck. What if that wasn't a punishment? What if that was a shepherd making sure his sheep stopped long enough to be restored? There's an old shepherding practice called casting. Sometimes a sheep will roll onto its back, maybe trying to scratch an itch, maybe just on an uneven surface, and get stuck. Legs in the air, but unable to right itself. Shepherds call this a cast sheep. If the shepherd doesn't find it within a few hours, it will die. The weight of its own body restricts blood flow. Gases build up. Predators find it helpless. The only way to save it is for the shepherd to come, gently roll it upright, hold it while its legs regain strength, and wait until it can stand on its own. Sometimes we are cast sheep. We've rolled over trying to get comfortable, and now we're stuck flat on our backs. And the shepherd comes, kneels down, and holds us until we can stand again. He leads me beside quiet waters. The Hebrew here is me menuchot, waters of rest, waters of quietness. Sheep are terrified of fast-moving water. A rushing stream or a river with any current will paralyze a sheep with fear. They simply will not drink from it, even if they are desperately thirsty. And there's a practical reason for this terror. If a sheep steps into moving water, its thick wool coat absorbs the water and becomes incredibly heavy. The sheep can be dragged under and drown in water that barely comes up to a person's knees. So the shepherd doesn't just find any water. He finds still water, safe water. Water the sheep can actually drink from without being destroyed by it. God does not drag you to the rushing current of chaos and tell you to drink. He leads you to the still place, the quiet place, the place where you can actually receive what you need without being overwhelmed by it. In our world of constant noise, social media, news cycles, endless information, never-ending demands, the invitation of this verse is radical. Come to the still waters. This is where I feed you. He refreshes my soul. The Hebrew word for soul here is nephesh, and it is one of the richest words in the entire Old Testament. It doesn't just mean your spiritual component or your inner feelings. It means your whole inner life, your emotions, your will, your desires, your drives, the deepest part of who you are, the part that makes you you. God refreshes your nephesh, your whole inner life, not just gives you a better attitude, not just makes you feel temporarily better. He restores the deepest parts of you, the parts that have been depleted, the parts that have been wounded, the parts that have been running on empty for so long, you've forgotten what full even feels like. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Shepherds in ancient Israel used specific paths, pathways worn into the hillsides over generations of use. These paths connected water sources, grazing land, and shelter. A sheep that wandered off the path was in danger. For his name's sake, meaning God guides us rightly not just for our benefit, but because it is who he is. His character is at stake. He cannot be an unfaithful shepherd without ceasing to be God. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Everything changes here, and I need you to feel it. Verses 1 through 3 have been pastoral, beautiful, green and still and restful. But verse 4 walks us straight into darkness. The original Hebrew is Gate Salmavet, the valley of deep darkness, the valley of the shadow of death. Ancient Jewish readers would have understood this as a very specific kind of place. Narrow ravines in the Judean wilderness where the sun barely penetrated, where predators hid in the shadows, where the terrain was treacherous and a single wrong step could be fatal. Every flock had to pass through these ravines. There was no way around them, only through. The good grass was on the other side. The seasonal migration routes passed through them. There was no shepherd who got to avoid the dark valleys with his flock. They all had to walk their sheep through the shadow of death. And what David says is not, God will remove the valley from my path. Not, God will airlift me over the dark place. Not, God will make the valley disappear. He says, even though I walk through it. Through. Not around, not above, not teleported past. Through. In the valley, in the dark, in the shadow, but not alone. Now notice the most remarkable grammatical shift in the entire psalm. Verses 1 through 3, David speaks about God in the third person. He makes me. He leads me. He refreshes. He is describing God from a comfortable distance, the way we talk about someone who is nearby but not in the room. But the moment he enters the dark valley, he stops saying he and starts saying you. You are with me. The dark valley is where theology becomes personal. It is where doctrines about God become desperate cries to God. It is where He provides becomes you are here. Where He is faithful becomes you haven't left me. Crisis strips away the comfortable distance. And what David found, what billions of people across thousands of years have found, is that when everything else is stripped away, God is not further, He is closer. A man who survived a serious accident once described the moment of impact, the split second before everything went dark, as the most present he had ever felt with God in his entire life. Not in church, not during worship, in the crash. He said it was like the noise of life. All the ambition, all the busyness, all the performance was suddenly silenced. And in that silence, he realized God had been right there the whole time. The valley has a way of removing everything that was keeping you from noticing the shepherd was already beside you. I will fear no evil. This is not the absence of fear. David is not saying he feels no fear. He is saying he will not be controlled by fear. He will not let fear be the loudest voice. He will not let fear make his decisions. The Hebrew uses a deliberate future tense, lo irara, I will not fear evil, a choice, a declaration made in advance, not a feeling, a decision. Because the reason for the courage is not the absence of danger. The valley is still dark, the predators are still there, the terrain is still treacherous. The reason for the courage is one single word, for you. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Not because the circumstances have changed, because the shepherd is present. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. These two instruments are not decorative. They are tools of active, engaged shepherding. The rod, a short, heavy club. Every shepherd carried one. It was used to beat back predators that came at the flock. When a wolf approached, the shepherd stood between the wolf and the sheep and used the rod. He didn't throw the sheep to the wolf to protect himself. He put himself in danger for the sheep. Jesus would later describe this exact distinction, the difference between the true shepherd who fights for his sheep and the hired hand who runs when the wolf comes. The staff, the long curved instrument, the iconic shepherd's crook, used to gently redirect sheep, used to hook around the neck of a sheep that had wandered too close to the edge of a cliff and pull it back to safety, used to part the brush to check for snakes before the flock walked through it. The rod fights your enemies. The staff keeps you from destroying yourself. You need both. And notice the word David uses, comfort. These instruments of discipline and defense, they are comfort to him. Because a sheep in a dark ravine that cannot see the shepherd can still feel the staff. A gentle pressure against its flank, a presence in the dark. I don't know where we're going, I can't see the path, but I can feel the staff. And the staff means the shepherd is right here, right beside me, actively guiding me through this. If you are in a dark valley right now, if you are in the kind of season where you cannot see the path, where you cannot see the way through, where the darkness feels like it might be permanent, let me ask you something. Can you feel the staff? Not see. Feel the quiet nudge, the closed door that kept you from a worse path, the unexpected provision at exactly the right moment, the verse that found you on exactly the right day, the person who called at exactly the right time. The shepherd is in the valley with you. You may not be able to see him, but he is right beside you, staff in hand, guiding every step. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. With this verse, the metaphor shifts. We have moved from shepherd and sheep to host and guest. In the ancient Near East, hospitality was one of the most sacred duties a person could perform. To invite someone to your table was to offer them protection, provision, and honor, all at once. A guest at your table was under your covering. Your reputation was tied to their welfare. But here is the breathtaking thing about this verse. God doesn't prepare the table after the enemies are gone. He doesn't say, wait until the threat is past, and then we'll celebrate. He prepares the table in the presence of your enemies. While they are watching, while they are still there, while the threat has not yet been resolved. The feast happens in the middle of the battle, not after it. There's a scene in the book of 2 Kings where the prophet Elisha and his servant are surrounded by the entire Syrian army. Horses, chariots, thousands of soldiers surrounding a single city. The servant panics. What shall we do? And Elisha says calmly, do not be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then he prays for the servant's eyes to be opened. And suddenly, the servant sees the mountains full of horses and chariots of fire surrounding the Syrian army. The enemy was always surrounded. The feast was already prepared. The problem was a lack of vision, not a lack of provision. The enemies in your life, the opposition, the people who want to see you fail, the circumstances that seem designed to destroy you, they do not have the authority to cancel what God has prepared for you. They can watch. They cannot touch the table. You anoint my head with oil. In the shepherd context, anointing with oil was one of the most important daily rituals of the shepherd's care. At the end of each day, as the sheep returned to the fold, the shepherd would inspect each one individually. He would check for wounds. He would treat scratches and cuts with oil, a natural antiseptic and healing agent. But there was another reason for the oil that most people don't know. In the dry summer months in Israel, a particular species of fly would lay eggs in the nasal passages of sheep. The hatching larvae would burrow deeper and drive the sheep absolutely mad. They would beat their heads against rocks, charge fences, run in frantic circles. Shepherds called this fly struck, and it was one of the most distressing things that could happen to a sheep, sometimes fatally so. The solution was to coat the sheep's nose and face with thick oil. The flies couldn't penetrate it. The sheep was protected. When David says, "You anoint my head with oil," he is describing God as the one who protects his mind from the things that would drive him to madness. The intrusive thoughts, the obsessive fears, the lies that burrow in and torment from the inside, the enemy's whispers that you replay on loop at 3 a.m. God puts oil on the face, and the flies cannot get in. My cup overflows. In the context of the ancient feast, the host was responsible for keeping the guest's cup full. An empty cup was a shameful failure of hospitality. But David doesn't say my cup is full. He says it overflows. It runs over. There is more than enough. There is abundance beyond what a cup can hold. This is a God of extravagant generosity, not a God of minimum provision. Not a God who meets the exact need and not one drop more. A God whose generosity runs over the edges of the container you brought to hold it. This does not mean material wealth. It does not mean God will make you rich if you have enough faith. What it means is this: God's grace, God's mercy, God's presence, God's love, these do not run dry. They do not run out. They overflow. At the wedding at Cana, the very first miracle Jesus performed, they ran out of wine, an embarrassing social crisis. And Jesus didn't make just enough wine to get through the evening. He made somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons. The wine he made was better than anything they'd had before, and there was far more of it than they needed. This is consistently how God operates in Scripture. Not barely enough, more than enough. The overflow is not accidental. It is part of his character. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We have arrived at the final verse, and it is worth stopping to notice how far we have traveled. We started in green pastures, in peace, in provision, in rest. We walked through the dark valley, in danger, in shadow, in the presence of enemies. And now we end here with a declaration about forever. Surely. This is not a timid word. The Hebrew is ak, which is a word of strong affirmation, certainty, conviction. It can be translated as only, or certainly, or without question. David is not expressing a hope. He is not saying, I think maybe goodness and love might follow me if I'm lucky. He is making a declaration from the bedrock of lived experience. After everything, after the valleys, after the enemies, after the dark, after all of it, I am certain of this. Goodness and love will follow me. The Hebrew words are tov and chesed. Tov, goodness. The same word used in Genesis chapter 1 when God looked at creation and said it is good. The deep, foundational goodness that is woven into the nature of God Himself. Chesed. This word is almost impossible to fully translate into English. It is used 248 times in the Old Testament. It is most often rendered as loving kindness or steadfast love or mercy. But it carries a covenantal weight. It is the love that is loyal even when it costs everything. The love that does not break even under maximum pressure. The love that God promised to Israel and then demonstrated by sending His Son. Tov and chesed, goodness and covenant love, will follow you all the days of your life. But here is the word I want to land on. Follow. The Hebrew word is radaf, and here is something that will change how you read this verse forever. Radaf does not mean to casually accompany. It does not mean to gently stroll alongside. Radaf means to chase, to pursue, to hunt down. It is the word used for a military pursuit, when an army pursues a fleeing enemy and will not stop until it catches them. God's goodness and covenant love are not waiting for you to achieve them. They are not something you earn by being faithful enough, righteous enough, disciplined enough in your prayer life. They are hunting you right now, in the middle of your mess, in the valley, in the confusion, in the years where you wandered, in the seasons where you barely prayed, in the moments you are most convinced you have disqualified yourself from God's care. His goodness and His love have been chasing you the entire time. All the days of my life, not the good days, not the days you showed up, not the days you got it right. All of them, every single one. The day of your greatest triumph, chest is there. The day of your deepest failure, chest is there. The days you felt God's presence powerfully, chest is there. The days you felt absolutely nothing, chest is there. All the days, without exception. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The psalm that began with a shepherd ends with a home. Not a journey that goes on forever through dark valleys, not an endless cycle of green pastures and shadows. A destination, a permanent dwelling, a homecoming that has no end. The Hebrew word for dwell here is yashab, which means to sit down, to settle, to inhabit permanently. Not a visit, not a temporary shelter, a permanent home. And the house of the Lord. In David's understanding, this was the place of God's presence, where YHWH dwelt, where heaven touched earth, the most holy place. David is saying, at the end of all this, the pastures, the valleys, the enemies, the table, the oil, the overflowing cup, I end up in the permanent presence of God, forever. That is where I am going. That is the destination the shepherd has been leading me toward the whole time. Let me walk back through it one final time, slowly, and let every image land. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Wherever you are today, whatever valley you are walking through, whatever table is being set in the middle of your enemies, whatever dark season has made you question whether the shepherd is still there, he is. Not watching from a distance, not waiting for you to find your way back. Right beside you, staff in hand, fighting with his rod, setting the table, pouring the oil, filling the cup until it runs over. And his goodness, his chest, has been chasing you your entire life. You just haven't always been able to look back far enough to see it.
Walk with God.